State with us today. So thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you to ODHE for bringing us to this webinar. My name is Jennie O'Connell, and I am the director for the Center for Sexual and Relationship Violence Support Services, which is a mouthful to say. So you'll often hear people say SERVS, and as we're talking, you might hear us use the acronym SERVS. I'm going to let Boo and Julius introduce themselves, but before I do, just for those of you who have joined, please go to www.menti.com and use the code 18794132. There's 5 quick questions that we're asking that are going to help us later on in the presentation. So I'll pass it on to Boo.
My name is Bayadir Alrehaili, and my pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the graduate assistant in SERVS, and I'm a doctoral student in the Health Education and Promotion Program in Kent State University. And welcome for joining us here.
My name is Julius Payne. I'm the program coordinator with SERVS.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna move off of the screen, but if you need that code, just let us know and we can throw it into the chat. All right, so what we wanted to cover today, first we wanted to kind of make sure that we're all kind of using the same language, we're all on the same field. So we're going to do a brief review of comprehensive prevention planning, talking just quickly about the role of theories and frameworks, risk and protective factors, the different levels of prevention. We want to talk about what it is that we do at Kent State, that's awareness and prevention. And then we're going to go into a deeper dive of our primary prevention initiatives and really talk about what are we doing that's really at that core of preventing harm before it happens. Talk about some of our challenges and some of our successes, and then we really want to open it up. We want to talk to you about what questions you have, what comments, thoughts, and maybe even hear what are some of the things that you've done on your campus around primary prevention that's worked well. So I will tell you that developing a comprehensive prevention plan at Kent State is an ongoing process. It's not something that we just did and everything and we're just implementing it. It's been something that we've been working on for a while. We started it several years back and began assessing what was going on in our community, what was happening with our students, what's currently being done in our community, what are the needs. But then we've had, staff turnover, the world shut down for a few years, so we've had some things that have impacted really continuing to move it forward. But we're currently getting that plan to paper and really starting to implement in the fall, preparing to implement some really key initiatives to make some positive change. And some of them we've already implemented, but getting it to paper for us as an institution really will help that accountability in the work that we're doing. So just a quick review on theories and frameworks. You're probably all familiar with the socio-ecological model. The concept that the work that we do needs to impact different levels. It needs to be around the individual, the relationship, the community, and that could be their peer community, that could be just a smaller group community like athletics or the fraternity sorority community, and then institutional or society, so those even bigger perspectives. When we have looked at our prevention education for our students, in terms of a theory, we really have looked at the integrated behavior model. And what we really like about this theory is that it looks at attitudes and beliefs, perceived norms, personal agency and skills. So what we're working with our students, we're running to really apply, what do they believe? What is their perception? What are the norms that they see and they perceive of their peers? And then what are the real things going on? Holding those conversations with their peers on what's really happening with their peers. What are their peers really thinking? And then really empowering them with that agency that they can have a role to play in making Kent State a safer place. They can have a role to play in preventing harm in our community. And then we do a lot to try to teach those skills, give them the opportunity to practice what can they do when they're in the real world, when they're with their peers, to encourage positive behavior, healthy sexuality, and prevent harm from happening. With our employees, the theory that we've utilized is the information, motivation, behavior, skills model, so that we inform our employees on what it is, their expectations, what behaviors that we would want to see as a community, what the motivation is around their role that they play in the community and how they impact our students, and then also helping them understand the behaviors and the skills to engage in those behaviors, how to have those conversations with their students when a student might disclose to them or come up to them. We also look at the principles of prevention and the levels of prevention, and I'm going to talk more about those in a couple slides. So the principles of prevention, and this is very similar to, if you remember with ODHE, they have I think it's 7 things that they want to be part of your comprehensive prevention plan. A lot of those 7 things fit right into these principles of prevention. The first one, that prevention needs to be comprehensive. So it needs to have multiple components, whether it's happening before they get to campus, when they're in the residence halls, if they're part of a student org, even conversations with their advisors or in the classroom. So it's not just us. If it's just one office or one area being the only ones that are talking about this issue, that changing culture is going to take a long time to happen. And so having it be multiple people across different places where the students connect. Having varied teaching methods. So making sure that there's some type of active skills-based component. If every workshop is just a PowerPoint and a lecture, students aren't going to walk away with the skills to really make change. So it's important that there's something actionable that they can take away. Sufficient dosage, so exposing them to enough of it to have an effect, so that we're not just having one thing and then we're done. Well, we did a speaker, so we're good for the year. That we need to have prevention that's happening throughout the school year at various times and throughout their career within the institution. It also needs to be appropriately timed, which means that it needs to fit developmentally of where they are. The things that we tell a first-year student are going to be different than the things that we're going to be telling a junior or a senior or a graduate student. And so making sure that the message and the education and the prevention and the skills are relevant to where they are developmentally. One of the places where I think this showed up really well within the work at Kent State is our approach to our NCAA student education, so that we really had thought through the developmental needs of our student and where a first-year student is versus a junior or senior. And so our juniors and our seniors got more education around bystander action, around role modeling, and being a mentor towards younger students to engage in healthy, positive sexual behavior versus just what is consent, what is a healthy and an unhealthy relationship. Those were more the things that our first year and our second year students needed to understand and to know. Again, reiterating that having those theories behind it, understanding why you're doing what you're doing, what effect do you hope that your prevention has. Having those positive relationships so that students, faculty, and staff all have those positive relationships with one another. They need to ensure that that students know that staff and faculty are there to help them. And that they can get them the appropriate resources if they need that. And also that faculty and staff believe in the same norms of the institution. Whatever your institution message is, the faculty and staff need to be conveying that same message. Programming needs to be socio-culturally relevant, so it needs to be tailored to fit the audience. So your examples need to match who you're speaking with. So giving examples that are appropriate for an LGBTQ audience versus appropriate for students of color versus appropriate for fraternity and sorority members. What language are you using that lets them know that they are welcomed and a part of this conversation? Having valuations So not just evaluating at the programmatic level, the actual programs and feedback and what people got out of those, but also systemically, what changes are you seeing within the institution based on the programming that's happening? And then finally, that your staff is well trained. It's important that staff members who give presentations or do conversations or provide prevention are sensitive to the topic, competent in understanding the barriers and complexities around talking about healthy sexuality and sexual and relationship violence, and that they not only receive enough training, but they also have the capacity and the support and supervision for what they're doing. You know, one of the worst things you can do is just send somebody out and not kind of check in with them and support them and make sure that how did it go, what went well, what didn't go so well, what could you do differently. Having that supervision is really important. I'm not going to go over risk factors and protective factors, but I did put this in because it's being recorded and you'll have that as more of a reference. But these are some of the risk factors that are on all different levels of the sociological model to perpetration. And then on this slide are those protective factors. And we put up ones that were more relevant to institutions of higher education. All right, so what do we do at Kent State? So before I go to this, let me see if I can figure out how to change what I'm sharing. Sharing that. Okay. So we asked you guys at the beginning to answer some questions, and we wanted to get a sense of where you were with your understanding of primary, secondary, tertiary prevention and awareness. And so the first question was outreach to a student who reported experiencing harm or assisting with support. 3 of you said secondary, and then 1 said primary, 1 said tertiary. That is secondary. That is secondary prevention. So secondary prevention is the prevention work that is about preventing that initial impact. When something happens, how do you prevent additional trauma from that initial incident that occurred? So it's usually right after the incident occurred or right when somebody is first disclosing the incident that occurred. It's how you respond to that and what services and support you provide to that person prevents that secondary trauma. All right, so the next one we said provide information on reporting options and resources for support through social media. All right, so 1 person said that was awareness programming, 2 people said primary prevention, 3 people said secondary. So this is really awareness, because you're just providing information. Here are what your options are, here are your resources. So it's just giving them that information. Now, ideally, if they reach out to those resources are going to then provide that secondary prevention, right? If they want to report to somebody or if they're seeking support. But just the providing of the information is more that awareness programming. Teaching decision-making skills around relationships. So 1 person said that was awareness, 3 people said primary, 2 people said secondary. And that is that primary prevention. So if you're teaching those skills around how to make decisions within your relationships, how to communicate with your partner about your boundaries and what you're comfortable with, those are all things that prevent harm before it happens. And that's that primary prevention. It's getting at the root cause of sexual and relationship violence and addressing behaviors that can prevent harm from happening. And then hosting a speak out for survivors to share and be validated. Some people said that was awareness. No one thought that was primary. 1 person said secondary, 2 people said tertiary. And that's probably more on the tertiary. There's some people who can say that that might be a little bit of the secondary because it's after something has happened. But tertiary prevention is really those initiatives that are long-term impact, that really try to change that long-term impact. So counseling services, this being able to share their story and be validated, hearing from other survivors that they're not alone, really gets at that long-term impact and that tertiary prevention. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. All right. So what do we do here at Kent State in those 3 or 4 areas? So a lot of our awareness programming, we have some academic courses that are awareness programming. We also do a lot of educational workshops, whether it's on Title IX and policy, consent, healthy, unhealthy relationships, just educating people about the dynamics of sexual assault. That's that more education and awareness programming. Our incoming student education, clothesline projects, Take Back the Night, Relationship Abuse Awareness Month, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, or Stalking Awareness Month, programming during those awareness months, putting information on social media, messaging campaign, tabling events. Those are all really awareness educational programming. When it comes to primary prevention, and we're going to go more in depth into the last 4 of these, we do have some academic courses where the faculty, the way they teach it, it's really skills-based, and it's trying to get at those root causes and change behavior to prevent harm from happening. But we also, our bystander movement, focuses on the education and engaging individuals to step in before something happens. Our peer influence programs, our mask unity dialogues, and our Cultivating Liberation. And like I said, we're going to actually go into more in depth on those as primary prevention initiatives. Some of our secondary prevention is we have a policy that's about being fair and equitable. So anybody who's impacted, whether it's the complainant or the respondent, there's a policy to ensure that there's a fair and equitable process. We have a SART team that meets on a regular basis to make sure that the support is there for anyone who's been impacted. Through SERVS, we provide advocacy services. Our peer influencing course, so attending that course is more that secondary prevention. After they attend the course, you'll hear some of the ways that they can be more active and involved in making a difference on their campus, which gets more to that primary prevention. Having a lot of supportive measures within our institution to support somebody who's been impacted. Take Back the Night can be a secondary, especially if it's somebody who recently was harmed. Again, because it's that supportive environment, that feeling like they're validated, they're not alone. And then we have MOUs with our community resources. And so that having those in place allows us to prevent harm, that impact, the initial impact, because we can connect them with appropriate resources if they're trying to get a civil protection order, or if they're going to the hospital to get a forensic exam. We have partnerships with our Town Hall 2 or Safer Futures in our county to provide them with support during those processes. Tertiary prevention, so that long-term impact. We do survivor nights where we have activities around healing. We have support groups, so somebody that's at that point where they're ready to talk about it, whether they go to counseling or support groups. We do the Speak Out as part of our Take Back the Night, which has that validation. We are trying and working on embedding our prevention program into the institution. So it's not just one office doing it, but it's part of the culture at Kent State. Collecting and using data to drive the work that we're doing, making sure that that long-term impact. We do a lot of data assessment on the impact of someone who comes to SERVS. What do we see after they've worked with us? And how can we better improve our services to support that student on a more long-term basis? And then we also provide educational opportunities for those who may have engaged in harmful actions, so that provides them with opportunities to not harm again in the future as they learn more, because sometimes the actions they're engaging in is because of a lack of awareness of something. So providing those education to make sure that there's not a future harm. And then these are just our student prevention goals. And they kind of fall into 3 categories around shared responsibility, a culture of care, and a culture of respect. So we're working to build a community that understands and embraces the idea of shared responsibility and the role that we all play in preventing harm. We're trying to affirm healthy sexuality and uphold our campus community as a safe place to live, learn, and work. And then we want to increase our community norms that promote gender equity and an intolerance to sexual violence or actions that might perpetuate sexual harm. And so those are the things that we're doing through all of our prevention and our work with students. So I'm going to pass it over to Julius and Boo to talk more specifically about our bystander movement, our peer influencing programs, mass unity, and our cultivating liberation dialogue.
So just talking about our bystander movement or initiative, here on campus, we do Green Dot, but it's embedded in our campus culture through Flashes Take Care of Flashes, which is an overall campus initiative. The first thing I want to talk about a little bit is collaborative efforts. So none of this works or becomes culture on your campus if you don't have partners in doing it. So we have partners all across campus, whether it's multiple facilitators across the institution that have been trained to facilitate conversations. We collaborate with our peer leadership training course. These are the students that are coming in that want to be RAs, want to be orientation guides and things like that. We're also part of the FYE courses. A lot of those professors will contact us to have us come into the first year experience classes to hold these bystander intervention discussions, as well as fraternities and sororities. And we also are pretty much on a yearly agreement with athletics and a lot of the sports teams to come in and hold these discussions of how they can model this behavior and kind of impact the incoming students as well. So a lot of the bystander movement is related to resetting norms, all right, trying to teach individuals how to have a willingness to intervene. And the best way to do that is to equip them with the tools to intervene. A lot of times students don't intervene or won't intervene because they don't necessarily know how, or they don't have different ways or avenues to intervene. So we're encouraging them to have a willingness to intervene, a willingness to speak up. And the two norms that we promote most heavily are violence is not tolerated, like we said before, with the culture of respect, but also that everyone's expected to do their part. Because we all know that to change a culture or to set a norm, to set culture, it's not going to be a group of 10 people. They can get the ball rolling, but in order for things to take shape and take form as far as the culture that you want on your campus, everyone's going to have to do their part, whether it's speaking to other students, whether it's modeling the behavior, whether it's intervening when needed, all those different things, having those conversations, but everyone's expected to do their part. A lot of what we do is skill-based. We do scenarios that are real relevant and right now. So we're on a college campus. So I'm not going to do necessarily, depending on the class, I'm not going to do a scenario about you dealing with the CEO. You're on a college campus. So we're going to talk about being at a party and seeing something, maybe being out shopping and seeing something in the student center or something that happens in class. So we want to keep scenarios very relevant to where the students are now. We teach them and we equip them with the tools to step in and safely intervene. We always let them know that safety is the #1 priority. Because if you're not safe yourself, then it's very hard to help someone else or intervene on someone else's behalf. But we always let them know, we equip them with tools through these scenarios, we let them work that out. And I always tell them, make it personal. Figure out how you would actually intervene in this situation. One of the most important things that we also talk about are the barriers that we have to intervene. I always tell the students that we all have barriers when it comes to intervening, and we're always going to have barriers. So we talk about what those barriers can be. We talk about what our personal barriers can be, what barriers for other people can be, and then we talk about how to navigate those and overcome those in an attempt to intervene in certain situations that can be harmful.
So I'm going to talk about peer influence programming. So I'll start by SERV's internship program, which aim to engage students in education, outreach, and awareness initiatives. SERVs usually have like 7 to 10 interns in charge of creating social media and newsletter flyers content. Interns gain knowledge and skills of sexual and relationship violence, so they understand their role in prevention by gaining skills in their power of influence, practicing and teaching others how to be upstandard. So they do that by taking a significant role in campus presence, like by doing a tabling, program planning such as RAM and SAM, also some workshops like Love Labyrinth. Also, we support the student by empowering their voices, meaning we affirm students that as intern, your voice is empowered, so they can express their needs, their preferences, and their rights. So other important point is professional development that serves focus on. So in the professional development, where interns can gain knowledge, skills, and experience, to prepare them in the future to like be ready in the work setting. So they can practice and gain some skills like planning, prioritizing when they take a lead on different program and events. Also public speaking by doing some presentations. Also many other skills like dressing professionally or teamwork or decision making, problem solving, and verbal communication. So the other thing, the other peer influence program is serves peer influence course. Our peer influence course is called Sexual and Relationship Violence Prevention, Creating a Safer Campus. It's a pilot course launched this semester and will be delivered again next fall. So this course is in a partnership with the Health Education and Promotion, College of Health Education and Human Service in Kent State University. So this course aims to build a future of Kent State University student committed to standing firmly against violence and becoming part of the solution to end sexual and relationship violence once and for all. Also, this course focuses on prevention, awareness, and activism surrounding power-based personal violence. It will provide the student with the knowledge and skills needed to positively influence their community and maintain a safer, more inclusive college campus that encourages a belief in positive behavior or healthy communications and active bystander actions. So some of the general themes that covered in the course are healthy sexuality, sexual citizenship, intersectionality, power-based personal violence, healthy, unhealthy, and abusive relationship, safety planning, self-care. We also cover bystander intervention, professionalism, advocacy, and different theoretical model to prevention. So the course is designed in two parts. The first one is a lecture where they will be provided with the knowledge and the skills needed to be prepared for the second part, which is the practical course, where a trained student who successfully completed the first course will be peer resources to educate, provide support, and advocate to end sexual and relationship violence on Kent State University. So finally, student will be in a leadership position to lead a student organization to advocate for a real and lasting change. So for now, I'll let Julius complete the presentation and talk about masculinity initiatives.
Thanks. All right, so our masculinity initiative, we named it Mask Unity. That name actually came about from just discussions with Yvette, who's another individual who works here. But it's basically to promote unity through our thoughts on masculinity. So when we do our Mask Unity initiatives, some of the more important things that we decided upon when we came up with this team or this program was to have a multi-department team. And that basically means that there's approximately 20 individuals that have input or talk to us and give us their thoughts on programming, on events, on ideas across campus. So that ranges from individuals from the LGBTQ plus center, our student multicultural center, all over campus, athletics, and we also include our interns. Each semester, we usually get a group of interns, 7 or 8 interns. So I'll take 4 or 5 of those and they'll be on the Mask Unity team. That way we always have that student voice. Because the things that we're doing are majority for the students. So we need to know what their needs are, what they feel the discussion topics may need to be as well. So when we talk about the Mask Unity Initiative, this is actually something that started prior to me coming here. It wasn't under that name, but he started with focus groups. He started with diversity and having multiple groups have focus groups and answer different questions on thoughts on masculinity. So groups ranging from international men, had a women's group, had a fraternity group, we had a RA group, an LGBTQ plus group. So all of these different groups sat down with that individual and just talked about what masculinity meant. There was a list of questions, and each group got to answer those questions openly and honestly. And then from there began to build the program. So some of the important factors in those discussions was embracing the perspective of other people. And that's just knowing that, you know what, when I go sit in this group, everyone may not think the same way that I do. Everyone may not have the same ideals that I have because we come from different areas. We come from different upbringings. We have different influences in our lives. Respecting the ideals and views of others, making sure that it's great conversation and not an argument or not a I disagree or putting people down for their ideas or their views, just unpacking the conversations so that we can grow together and we can understand different viewpoints. Major part of it is understanding the role masculinity plays in relationships, and not just intimate relationships, but we're talking about friendships. We're talking about relationships with authority figures, relationships with other individuals, other students, just acquaintances, things like that. So understanding and talking about the role that masculinity plays in all relationships, as well as navigating our own personal thoughts on masculinity, because that is going to shape how we respond in different situations or how we respond to different individuals when we interact with them. All right, so the Mask Unity team also does programming and events. When we have RAM and SAM, which is Relationship Abuse Awareness Month and Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, we try to make sure as best as possible to have at least one or two events or programs that we're putting on that focus on the intersectionality of masculinity and relationship abuse or sexual assault. And not in a negative way, but just how it ties in, how our thoughts on masculinity can help with healthy relationships. It can help to stand against sexual assault or relationship abuse, things like that. So we've had things such as panel discussions. We've had information tables. We've had tables where, you know, they were interactive, where you could answer a question. We had a masculinity box, which was a big cardboard box covered with white paper, where there were questions on there, things like, what does man up mean to you? What does it mean to be a man? Things like that, where people could just come around and write on that. They could just say, for me, when I hear man up, it means yada, yada, yada. Or when I hear be a man, it means this or that. So we try and make sure that we're consistent and we're out there, making sure that there's programming, it's a safe space for individuals to just come and have that conversation that isn't had as often as it probably needs to be. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Cultivating Liberation, which is our, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just getting the video ready, so just tell me when you're ready for me to show the video.
Okay. And our Cultivating Liberation initiative is an initiative where we got to talk to students openly about how their voices can be heard, what they'd like to see happen in terms of the university's response to power-based personal violence and things like that. So Jenny's going to show you the video that we made for that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how those conversations came along.
I help liberate and listening to and uplifting the voices of those who are not. I help liberate by advocating and ensuring safety in our community. Liberating my voice is important because not only does every story deserve to be heard, but advocating starts with ourselves. Liberating my voice is important because speaking up for myself and others is great change.
I'm liberated by knowing I'm able to resolve. I aim not only to enlighten myself, but enlighten others.
I am liberated by having the opportunity to share my story to both help and uplift others. I am liberated by working with each other for each other, whereas we are all part of each other's pain and can be part of each other's healing too.
Thank you, Jennie. All right, so as you can see in the video, it's not super long, but it's very diverse. A lot of different demographics in that video because we wanted people to understand that liberating voices can mean something different to different people. So during our dialogues, before we start that, it actually came about, we actually had an intern that agreed to help us, put together different groups and just set this whole thing up where we would get with students and ask them different things as far as what they felt like shared responsibility means, how they felt, they had access to different services or different things on campus that they may need. How comfortable they were with accessing those resources on campus. So we talk a lot about identities and the intersectionality of their different identities and how that can determine or dictate them going to ask for help or them seeking out certain resources. So we talked with students, our interns and things like that, and we came up with the idea to have different groups come into our space initially and answer these different questions. It says informal, but it's very structured. Like we'll come in, we initiate and facilitate the initial conversation, and then they'll break off into groups, and it'll be student led where there are student facilitators that talk openly with these other groups of students about all these different questions that we ask them. So the main basis is getting the student needs, understanding what they want, what they feel like they need more of, whether it's, hey, I feel like there should be something that shows us when we get on campus that this exists. There needs to be more marketing of that, more promoting of that. Or, hey, we need to put less resources towards this and maybe more towards this. So we talk about that a lot as well as the shared responsibility. And just like we said earlier, just them understanding what their responsibility is in helping prevent power-based personal violence. Whether it's being a voice that stands up for someone else, whether it's, hey, I saw this happening, or whether it's getting together and actually trying to change policy and procedure and things like that, which ties into the short and long-term goals that they talk about, because there will be things that they talk about that, look, we can do this next week. We can get this done next week or in 2 weeks. And then there's other things that are more long term where, okay, this is going to take some time, but we're moving towards that. We actually have a discussion that we have planned tonight. And the second phase of that, where I said before, where they came to us, the second phase is us going into their spaces, having these same conversations, but going into already established groups of students and having these same conversations across different demographics. And like we said, this is to make sure that, and obviously you may have some gaps or some spaces that you may not be able to get into, but this is to make sure that we're hearing from a lot of different perspectives and things like that. All right, well, it's on me to talk about the challenges and successes as well, real quick. Yeah. So when we talk about challenges and successes, some of these things can be a challenge initially and then become a success because you build on it or you actually accomplish these things. So training of facilitators can be, like I said, we have multiple facilitators across campus that can facilitate discussions on our bystander and prevention work. All right, so depending on your campus size, depending on where you're located and things like that, it may be a challenge to get multiple facilitators, but when you do, that's part of the success of being able to hold many different conversations maybe at the same time. All right, building capacity as well. everyone doesn't have the same staff count. Everyone doesn't have the same amount of staff or facilitators or faculty to be able to do these things. So a lot of it is doing what is feasible for your campus. We're a nice sized campus. I wouldn't be able to hold every single discussion surrounding our prevention or our bystander movement by myself. So it helps, and it's a great success that we have multiple facilitators across campus. Buy-in can be tough to get when you're initially starting out, but you're not always going to receive a yes. Sometimes you're on a college campus, people are busy, different departments are busy, but there's many avenues. You buy-in from the students, buy-in from the administration, buy-in from the overall campus. So just keep plugging away, but that can be a challenge at first, but once it begins to roll, then you'll figure out the spaces that are bought in, and then that'll take the message forward. Consistency, I would say that we're very successful with consistency. We have social media, we have different marketing that we do throughout the campus. We're out having these conversations all the time, different tabling events and things like that, just showing up at other department spaces and things like that, letting them know, hey, we're here. We're not always here to do a program. Sometimes we're just here to support. All right, so being consistent in that. And like Jennie talked about earlier, leveling up, making sure that, you know what, the information that we're providing and we're talking about is relevant to whatever time period those students are in. So a grad student isn't necessarily going to get the same conversation that an incoming freshman does. So just continuing to build on top of what you talk to them about or what you've done initially with them coming in.
Awesome. So we wanted to open it up to you all to see what questions you had. If there are things you wanted to talk more about or wanted more information, or what are you doing on your campuses that has been successful around primary prevention? So feel free to unmute or put something in chat.
Keith Brown said they said they can't unmute.
I'm sorry, trying to unmute Keith and then also unmute myself at the same time.
Okay.
Keith, you should be unmuted.
Okay, thanks. So a great presentation. Quick question with regard to Green Dot. How satisfied are you guys with that? And would you look at any other bystander intervention programs? Right now we use Bringing in a Bystander, but we've been looking at possibly adopting a different intervention program. We've heard of Green Dot, but since we're a community college, community institution, my understanding from people that I've heard is that it is not necessarily something that is applicable to community colleges. So, just want to get your guys' take on Green Dot, and again, see if you've looked at any other intervention programs.
Do you want me to take this, Julius?
You said what, Jennie?
Do you want me to take this?
You're fine. Go ahead.
So, I mean, as far as like the buy-in from our community, it's been amazing with Green Dot. Our student government has at different times looked at adopting proposals to require it for everybody, and people recognize it and stuff like that. One of the challenges for us with Green Dot is you have to be trained through Green Dot or through Altruistic, and it's not cheap. And so we've done a few trainings where we'll train, the first couple times we did trainings on campus, we trained 40 facilitators. The most recent one we did, which was like a couple months before the world shut down, we did, was it about 12 or 15 facilitators. So that, and it's the same price, whether you train 12, bring them in and have them do 12 or have them do 40. So cost wise, if you're looking at it from a business perspective, it's challenging. Yeah, I don't know if I would agree that it's not applicable to community colleges, only because you make it for your institution. Yes, the training and the way they train it is very much about four-year four-year institutions, residential typically. But the messaging and the lessons, you can adapt it to just your greater community, not just on your campus, but the surrounding areas and the neighborhoods and the town and stuff. And so it might take a little bit more work. And I know that Altruistic has a training that's more geared towards community colleges or smaller colleges. So I think they've tried to do some of that adapting for you. But it takes a lot to get it started and get it going and stuff too. Bringing in the bystander was something that we actually originally were using before. This was when they first created bringing in the bystander from UNH. We used it the first couple of years as we were getting facilitators trained in Green Dot. And I mean, students were receptive to the workshops and stuff. It didn't have at the time, because I think they've made a lot of changes, so I don't want to speak to it now, but at the time it didn't seem like it had as much of the social media, capital marketing kind of messaging piece around it, as much as it was just sort of the three, at the time, it was a 3-part workshop. So as far as like looking into other things, because of some of the costs around Green Dot, we have had conversations about creating our own, taking the messages around Green Dot and creating our own brand around it and stuff like that. But right for now, we're still continuing with Green Dot. So, I don't know if there's other follow-up questions or if that was helpful to you.
Jenny, there's one in the chat.
Oh, okay. I can't see the chat.
It says, I'll read it for you real quick, and then Lindsay had a question or contribution too. So we'll do the question and Lindsay after that real quick. So the question is about programming budget. Are you comfortable sharing what your budget is for programming?
So our programming budget ebbs and flows. And our actual budget within our department that we get from the university is not that much. It's about $10,000 a year. So we do a lot of, like I always joke that when we do buttons for tabling, I bring the button maker home and I sit there with my daughters punching buttons because, that's just what you do when you don't have a big budget. So we don't have a huge budget there. Now we have been very strategic of tapping into other funding. So like our Cultivating Liberation, shout out to Carrie, because that came from funding that was given to us through ODHE after we attended a 4-part training around Cultivating Liberation. And so we wouldn't have been able to get that program up and going without the support from ODHE. And so now that we're wrapping up the support from ODHE, we're hoping that by time we finish that, it'll be more embedded. And we do have a lead. The student who worked with us last year as an intern is part of undergraduate student government. And most of the students who were part of the video are somehow connected with undergraduate student government. So they're leaders on campus. She has somebody within USG that wants to help keep Cultivating Liberation going as part of USG, student facilitated working with SERVs. So ideally it'll continue and we'll get some funding that way. We've had a VAWA grant for 6 years, the campus programming grant that we can get some funding from. We were one of the VOCA grantees for a while until VOCA got slashed. And hopefully with some of the changes that have come down and some of the fixes to VOCA, most recently this week with the signing of the VAWA reauthorization, hopefully some of that money will come back and maybe we can tap into it again. So we have tried to work strategically in finding funding. Our USG gave us some funding at one point to get a lot of materials for Green Dot. So we've been able to find funding in other ways, but currently what we get from the institution is about $10,000.
I'm going to unmute you. I know you said your questions were related. I'm trying to unmute you. I know you said your questions were related to budget. I didn't know if there was anything else you
and then I was just curious as to what participation numbers were looking like for you all this year?
So I'm assuming you're probably seeing some of the same things we are seeing, is that participation is pretty low in a lot of our programming. Students, and I've talked with some of my colleagues in the Women's Center and the Student Multicultural Center, LGBTQ plus Student Center. Students just aren't ready to come out yet, it seems like. So our numbers haven't been as strong as they've been in the past. We are still seeing students have an interest. I mean, as far as like our internships, you know, we're still getting 7 to 10 students every semester. So they're wanting to engage with this topic. They're just not quite ready to come to programs per se. But we've had positive responses, you know, when we go to them, when we go to do tabling in the student center, or when we work with our residence hall directors and our RAs and stuff like that. Other thoughts? Are you saying the same thing, Lindsay? Around lower attendance participation?
There we go. Yes, we are. So I was just curious how other people were feeling or how their programming is going. So we've had to resort to a lot of awareness campaigning, a lot of social media, a lot of just more basic tabling, or getting invited to spaces where we're just more of a participant or introducing ourselves, but rather, you know, doing some of the trainings, just because it's been so, the participation has been so much less this year.
Thank you.
This is Keith. I have another question. With regard to your like platforms then. So our platforms, we're still doing virtual platforms for our primary prevention and ongoing awareness training. Are you guys doing that similar, or have you adjusted to in-person type of events?
So for the most part, we are in person. As an institution, we made the institutional choice to offer things in person this year. So I know Julius did a lot of Green Dot overview talks with our PLTC students, and those were all in person. The Cultivating Liberation conversations, the one tonight, is going to be in person at our Student Multicultural Center. So we do maybe a few smaller things might be virtual, but for the most part, we're all in person. I think we've had a couple, I think we had one thing that we offered a virtual option, or you could be in person. So you know, we do try to have more of that hybrid when it's feasible.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm looking at some of the thoughts that folks had and what they were hoping to get out. One person asked about what other institutions, what other universities are doing. So if anyone has any successes around primary prevention that you would want to share, ideas or that focus on prevention rather than response, better awareness of the issue in a college setting, especially someplace that's more of a smaller institution with more female students, like 90%. The principles of prevention, understanding the issues and how I can function more effectively. So hopefully we've answered some of those. I don't know if there are any other institutions that want to talk about successes you've had. I don't know if there's anything else. I mean, our contact information is there, so feel free to call or email any of us. We're happy to talk. And when we do have a final comprehensive prevention plan and it's completely written, we'll make sure that Carrie gets a copy of it, if she wanted to share it with any other institution.
Absolutely. Happy to share with others. And thank you so much for sharing the amazing work you're doing there at Kent State. Really appreciate you guys taking the time today to share those efforts, and good luck with the remainder of the semester and your events coming up next month. And thank you to all of you for joining today. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a good day.